Part 65. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 660. The heavenly Deo was broken. It was not a physical break, but a mental blow. From the beginning, a series of images appeared in the void, each of which showed the various scenes of Muzian and Shang Yanfei together in the past. Many of them even showed him being very intimate in Shang Yanfei's arms, pleasing Shang Yanfei. Crack. It was like the sound of glass breaking resounding under the sky, and then, the heavenly Deo suddenly raised his eyes. His hair was flying, and every strand of hair seemed to contain all kinds of strange visions. The will of the whole world seemed to descend into the void at this moment. Shang Yanfei saw thousands of gorgeous runes appearing behind the heavenly Deo. Each of these runes contained a kind of Tao rhyme, and each Tao rhyme, when it reached its extreme, could resonate with the Tao. These runes were all different paths that all creatures in the 9 provinces had taken in the past, representing the ultimate wisdom of creatures. However, at this moment, everything was controlled by the heavenly Deo. The terrifying power caused the entire void to vibrate, causing strange phenomena between heaven and earth. Then, the runes condensed into a huge building, like a palace rising slowly behind Tiandeo. This is the real power that Tiandeo controls. She originally didn't want to use this power, but Shang Yanfei was challenging her bottom line. Runes that condense the crystallization of the wisdom of all living things. Shang Yanfei smiled. Tiandeo is ruthless, but you have the 7 emotions and 6 desires of human beings. Everything related to him will affect your mood. In this case, why don't you give up Tiandeo's body and choose to stay with him? Tiandeo ignored it. For her, this was a battle with a doomed outcome. The peak of the original Mother Goddess in the past could not erase her, not to mention that the original Mother Goddess is so weak now. When everyone can control the rules, the final competition is each other's strength. And she is now much stronger than the original Mother Goddess. Tiandeo cast the rune behind him, and countless small black holes seemed to appear in the space, carrying terrifying spiritual pressure from all directions and attacking Shang Yanfei. Shang Yanfei did not make any big moves, but slowly raised her hand and snapped her fingers. The original spiritual energy centered on her overflowed, and the black hole continued to devour the original spiritual energy, and then expanded little by little until it finally exploded completely. After being bombarded again and again, the entire void seemed to gradually present its original chaos. Boom! Finally, the void was broken, and the figures of the original Mother Goddess and Tiandeo appeared in the sky above Jizhu. The dark clouds seemed to collapse in a corner, and the figures of both sides were difficult to see clearly. They didn't even use any spiritual energy, but they had already released a powerful Taoist technique. This is the rule of heaven and earth. Both sides have almost the same control over the rules. It's just a matter of who uses the rules to release the Taoist technique faster. Cracks appeared in the space, and the original appearance of the void seemed to appear in the cracks. The strong suction seemed to suck all the creatures in Jizhu into it. It seemed difficult to tell the winner, but if you look more carefully, you will find that Shang Yanfei's original aura has been slightly disordered, and her originally clear eyes seem to be much dimmer. Just as Tiandeo judged at the beginning, she really had the advantage. Shang Yanfei and she both controlled the rules, but once a tug of war began, she would definitely be the winner in the end. What's more, Tiandeo's extremely gorgeous black dress danced in the wind. She looked down at Jizhu under her feet, and the corners of her mouth slightly raised. Taboo rules have almost completed the coverage of the rules of heaven and earth. Boom! Thick lead-colored clouds slowly moved in from afar, seeming to completely cover Jizhu. Jizhu was pitch black at this moment, and there was a faint lightning flashing in the clouds. Amid the thunder, there seemed to be a thunder dragon wandering in the clouds, and the terrifying calamity clouds were brewing. Then, 9 golden chains descended from the calamity clouds and quickly swept towards Shang Yanfei, binding her almost instantly. The Lock of Rules. It was not the rules of heaven and earth, but the taboo rules. Both of them controlled the rules of heaven and earth, but Shang Yanfei only controlled part of the taboo rules, so she was naturally at a disadvantage at this moment. Mother is really about to win. In Juzhu, the taboo creatures who were fighting with King Di and others raised their heads, and when they saw the heavenly way under the sky that bound the original mother goddess, their faces showed ecstasy. It's a pity. If you were in your prime, I probably wouldn't be able to do anything to you even if I controlled the taboo rules. Tian Dao looked at Shang Yanfei calmly, as if he was understating it, but it's a pity that in order to deal with the arrow I sacrificed, you have been suppressing it since the beginning of creation, and the arrow of Tian Dao is constantly wearing away your spiritual consciousness. Until now, the original mother goddess in front of me has been so weak. From the birth of life at the beginning of creation to the endowment of human nature, Tian Dao has been competing with the original mother goddess for Muzian. And in the long river of time when Tian Dao was isolated from Juzhu by the original mother goddess, she has always been alone and has been enduring loneliness. But now it doesn't matter. Tian Dao slowly raised his slender jade hand and said with a smile, "It's time to end all these disputes, original mother goddess." The force of the taboo chain wrapped around the original mother goddess increased again. Dongzhou. The resounding thunder made the heartbeats of all living beings accelerate, and there was a kind of shock from the heart. Those monsters knelt down involuntarily in the deafening thunder, and their legs became weak. The people in the mortal world also knelt down involuntarily, trembling from instinct. It was a fear from the depths of their hearts that could not be resisted at all. At this moment, even these ordinary people could vaguely see the original mother goddess sealed by the lock of rules. Not only ordinary people, but also the great powers in the Hedeo realm, the rest of the cultivators knelt down involuntarily in the direction of the heavenly Dao at this moment. When the taboo rules and the rules of heaven and earth are used by the heavenly Dao, she is the strongest in the 9 heavens and 10 earths. In the restricted area, Ye Qingxin's hair seemed to be flowing with little flames. With the blessing of the taboo rules given by Ye Lingxian, she slapped the forbidden creature that was fighting with her to death with one palm. Then, she raised her head and looked in a certain direction of Dongzhou, with a touch of indifference on her face. Beside Ye Qingxin, Ye Siyu's pretty face was a little pale, and she said in a trembling voice, "Sister Ye, is that the original mother goddess?" Ye Qingxin stared quietly until a moment later, she said faintly, "Think about it, it's really ironic. The collection of the will of all living beings eventually overrides all living things and turns everyone into her slaves for her use. Yes, this is no different from slaves. The taboo rules cover the entire Juzhu, and the future Juzhu will be completely controlled by the taboo masters. The power of life and death is completely determined by their mood. In the past, the leader of the Lianji sect repeatedly took action to suppress the taboo. But now, she can no longer protect the people of Juzhu. At the same time, Lianji sect. Several leaders stood on the peak of Lianji Peak, looking at the dark sky in the distance. Even ordinary people can vaguely feel the terrifying pressure emanating from there, and for the leaders who have now realized the truth, they can clearly see that above the 9 heavens, the chains condensed by the rules are binding the leader of Lianji sect. The way of heaven is already invincible. After that, the taboo rules cover, even if Lianji sect has the formation set up by the leader in the past to protect it, if the taboo masters invade the sect together, even if there is a formation, what is the use? The leader is actually the original mother goddess. Yan Ruyu looked up at the sky with a solemn expression, and her eyes were extremely complicated for a while. They didn't expect that the mother in the early days of the founding would actually establish Lianji sect and protect them in the sect. The heavenly Dao suppressed the sect master, and now it will probably be the sect's turn. Yi Hao raised his head and stared closely, his eyes full of reluctance and anger. If the rules of heaven and earth had changed earlier, he might have been able to break through to the Hideo, and he wouldn't have to stay in the sect and watch the sect master fight alone. The faces of several chiefs were distorted, and they all stared at the direction of the heavenly Dao. And at this moment, Yan Ruyu seemed to have noticed something and subconsciously turned her head to look behind her. Senior Ling Long. As soon as the voice fell, several chiefs and elders present all looked behind them and saw Lin Ling, who was wearing a white dress and long silver hair. Her red eyes were as clear as rubies, and her face was bare, and her eyes swept over several chiefs and elders. Then, she opened her red lips and said, "I will take you to the Yaokai Holy Land. There is an ancient bronze coffin there, through which you can enter the heavenly palace." The voice was as clear and pleasant as the collision of jade, but the chiefs didn't even have time to figure out what Lin Ling said, and they looked at her in surprise. "You can speak directly." Lin Ling nodded gently. "After the feathers are transformed and ascended, the karmic fire will completely disappear." She suddenly remembered something and whispered, "By the way, remember to pack up those 8 treasure cranes and take them away." Yi Hao was stunned for a moment, and finally reacted. He frowned and said, "Senior Ling Long, the sect is facing life and death. We must not be alone. Won't we be laughed at by the world in the future?" "Staying here will affect my words," Lin Ling said calmly. And just when the chiefs present were still in a daze, they suddenly saw her silver hair flying and her red lips opened. "You are not here, but in the Yaokai Holy Land." Several chiefs disappeared in the Lianji sect. Lin Ling raised her eyes slightly and said again, "Lianji sect is not here, but in the forbidden area of Dongzhou." Boom! The whole world was obviously covered by the taboo rules, but Lin Ling's words still took effect. The entire sect, including the mountain, was directly moved horizontally. Before the disciples in the sect could react to what happened, the entire Lianji sect had already moved to the forbidden area of Dongzhou. The avenue is like water, penetrating everything. It is above all rules, so even the taboo rules will not affect the spirit dragon. Lin Ling turned her head and looked at the woman who was restricted by the rule lock under the sky. Then, she opened her red lips again, "Just who prohibits the use of rule locks?" Click. Indistinctly, it seemed that the rule lock between heaven and earth seemed to have loosened a little. However, at the same time, Lin Ling's chest seemed to have a burning sensation like fire, and the needle-like piercing pain made her frown. Although the magic of speaking spirits is powerful, it often involves cause and effect. But at this moment, just opening the mouth to loosen the lock of the rules has already involved the backlash of cause and effect. Lin Ling held her chest with both hands, raised her head again, and said softly, "The lock of the rules of Juzhu is forbidden." When the second sentence of the spiritual spell sounded, a crack appeared in the lock of rules between heaven and earth. However, at the same time, the fire of karma was also burning in her chest. Once the chain of rules was broken, all the cause and effect involved would be added to Lin Ling. But her expression was still calm. It was concubine Shangyan who took her in when she was homeless in the past, so this time it was time for her to repay concubine Shangyan. However, just as she opened her red lips again, someone suddenly held her shoulders. The familiar scent came towards him, causing Lin Ling to turn around in a daze. However, this glance made her eyes slowly widen. The young man who appeared in her field of vision was wearing a white robe embroidered with gold and silver threads. His body seemed to be enveloped by a fairy charm, and a brilliant and sacred light rushed towards his face. Extremely warm. AAA. She suddenly didn't know what to say, so that when she spoke in front of him, she turned into words that were incomprehensible. Musian smiled and said, "You should go back to heaven first and have a good rest." Lin Ling felt her body floating lightly in the air, and she vaguely saw Musian hugging her sideways. He looked down at the silver-haired beauty in his arms and said softly, "Leave the rest to me." "Do you have a way to save her?" Lin Ling asked. Musian shook his head, "I don't." Even ascending to immortality cannot suppress the way of heaven that is blessed by all living beings. He paused and continued, I can't help it, but all living things can. When people are oppressed to the extreme and there is a cliff behind them, with no way to retreat, they have to choose between being reduced to domestic animals in the future or being free. Even if they are facing the way of heaven, they will rise up and resist. Musian slowly raised his head and looked at the sky. I just need a little encouragement. Click. Above the 9 heavens, because of the spiritual dragon's words not long ago, there seemed to be a crack in the seal that restricted the original mother goddess with taboo rules as a lock. The incomparable holy light of heaven shrouded Jizhu, as if turning the dark world into daylight. However, even a monk would be able to detect that her seemingly holy brilliance is just an appearance. Because what she controls is no longer the rules of heaven and earth, but the taboo rules. The entire 9 provinces belong to her, and the creatures in the 9 provinces raised their heads and looked at the incarnation of the heavenly Deo above the sky with horror on their faces. There is also the original mother goddess who is bound by the incarnation of heaven. Dead silence. This is a fate-destined game. In the 9 provinces, the taboo shackles pointed at one person. Countless people stared at this scene, but they could only kneel on the ground and watch it happen. However, under the dark sky, there was the sound of footsteps. He seemed to be walking step by step towards the direction of heaven on a ladder to heaven, and this figure that was particularly eye-catching at this moment also attracted the attention of the Kyushu monks. Outside the Lianji sect, Lan Wu's eyes narrowed slightly and fell on Musian, muttering to himself, Musian? Why is he here? In the crowd, there was a low-pitched exchange among the monks soon. He actually took the initiative to walk towards the way of heaven. Is he trying to resist the way of heaven? It is not a wise move to disobey the law of heaven by oneself. Some people seemed to have guessed something and discussed among themselves in low voices. Until at a certain moment, someone in the crowd suddenly said softly, but at least he dares to resist. Even if he dies in the future, at least he will not become a domestic animal raised in a forbidden place. This voice caused the people present to fall into silence. Some monks had complicated expressions. They did not even have the courage to resist the law of heaven, and could only watch the Lord of Taboo control Kyushu. But at this time, a man who had just practiced Taoism for more than 10 years dared to face the majesty of heaven. One side is an ant, and the other side is heaven. The gap between the two sides is extremely huge. But for some reason, a glimmer of hope arose in people's hearts. Their eyes all fell on Musian. Not far outside the Lianji sect, several taboo lords had just left the battle, stepped back a few steps, and stood under the sky. Most of the taboo rules have been covered. After Tiandeo has dealt with the original mother goddess, it will be the turn of several human emperors in the Ascension realm. They don't need to go all out at this time, they just need to wait and enjoy the fruits of victory. However, at this moment, several taboo lords saw the young man walking up the stairs step by step from a distance. Behind him were all the living beings kneeling to the way of heaven. At a glance, there was almost no end in sight. The Lord of Order's eyes were cold and he said in a cold voice, Musian, it is forbidden to pass here. When she said this, a majestic energy had already locked onto the young man in front of her. If it weren't for the fact that Tiandeo attached great importance to him, and that Qing Emperor and others were not far behind him to protect him secretly, she would have killed him long ago. Kill. Musian raised his head and smiled, you just wanted to arrest someone, but now that he is in front of you, you don't dare to take action. The Lord of Immortality's eyes were cold, and his energy was also locked on Musian, preventing him from getting even half a step closer to the way of heaven. At this time, Musian suddenly stopped laughing. He spoke calmly, in the early days of the creation of Jizhu, the heavenly Deo created 9 taboos for its own selfish desires, causing the lives of the people in Jizhu to suffer. At that time, there was a person who suppressed the taboo turmoil and saved the people. 30,000 years later, the evil intentions of the Forbidden Land were still not dead, and it was still that person. She returned with injuries after suppressing the turmoil, but she once again protected the world of peace. After that, she founded the sect as Shangyanfei, and the taboos were stubborn, and she was born again to seize the luck. Musian's voice gradually became clear, and the speed of speech gradually accelerated. It was still the sect master who suppressed the taboos alone and quelled the turmoil. This voice, blessed by spiritual energy, spread throughout Jizhu, causing an uproar among the creatures in Jizhu. In the past, the rumor that the Forbidden Land occupied Jizhu, even some ordinary people had seen related records in ancient books. But at that time, many people thought that the Forbidden Land was annihilated in the long river of time. However, what Musian said at this moment exceeded their cognition. The Lord of Taboo has survived since the beginning of creation, and has repeatedly tried to erode Jizhu and keep all living things in captivity. These words moved countless people. They seemed to have forgotten that they were still kneeling on the ground at this moment, and they only felt that this huge amount of information was difficult to digest for a while. And some elders and clan leaders of the ancient families were moved. Unlike ordinary people in Jizhu, they knew that the taboo land was real and had indeed controlled Jizhu for a long time. That was the darkest period of time for all living things. But no one thought that behind that period of time, there had been someone silently guarding Jizhu. She is the mother of all living things, the original mother goddess. Kill him. At this time, the Lord of Order suddenly shouted, and she realized that something was wrong. Because the body of the mother seemed to be shaken. The Lord of Longevity had a vicious look in his eyes, and he had long hated Musian, and immediately stretched out his palm. That palm seemed to turn into a huge palm, covering the sky and sweeping towards Musian. Musian stood silently in mid-air, slowly raised his head, and said in a high-pitched voice, "Jizhu has been blessed by the Mother Goddess since the creation of the world. All kinds of misfortunes have been imposed on her. Little did she know that she has suffered from the erosion of the fire of karma for tens of thousands of years. Without the Mother Goddess, there would be no Jizhu. However, the heavenly Deo wanted to seize the luck of Jizhu for its own selfish desires, causing the lives of Jizhu to be destroyed. This act is infuriating to both humans and gods, and the heaven and earth can bear witness." An ancient bell sounded in the heavenly court. In the throne, the blood of the immortal essence faintly emitted a soft white light and entered Musian's body silently. His breath rose rapidly step by step, until finally, in the calamity clouds under the sky, it seemed as if a ray of sunlight penetrated the calamity clouds and shone down. The white robe seemed to be coated with a layer of warm light. Immortality. The only way to become an immortal in this world is not to practice, but to admit it. When the original Mother Goddess recognized someone, when that person could successfully refine a drop of blood essence she had transformed, he would be able to ascend to heaven. Under the countless gazes, Musian suddenly turned his head and looked at the people of Jizhu. "Now, who are you kneeling to?" The measuring ruler fell from the sky and pierced through the spiritual consciousness of the Lord of Immortality. Boom! After the monstrous explosion, it fell into a dead silence. Countless eyes were staring at Musian, and the pressure of the heaven made their legs a little weak and their bodies trembled. But there seemed to be something more in that look. At the same time, in the western region, Miao Bodhisattva held the jade bottle, raised his hand and pinched the seal, and a wisp of golden light enveloped the entire western region. The taboo rule seemed to be expelled at this moment. Then, I don't know who mustered up great courage first, and stood up firmly with trembling legs. Soon after, another person supported himself and slowly stood up. In the Dongzhou restricted area, Ya Lingxian rewrote some of the taboo rules. With the blessing of the taboo rules, the monks slowly stood up. The rules of the reincarnation forbidden area and the immortal forbidden area were also rewritten at this moment, and the previous sense of oppression seemed to disappear a lot at this time. The creatures of Jizhu got up from the ground one after another. Yao Meng's eyes moved slightly, as if she understood Musian's plan. The heavenly Dao is a collection of the wills of all living beings, and her power comes from all living beings. Perhaps not everyone dares to resist and face the majesty of the heavenly Dao. But as long as half of them dare to fight against the heavenly Dao, her power will be greatly weakened. Tiandao also noticed the movement below, and her eyes were a little colder. It's obvious that they just need to live under my control, but they are really a bunch of disobedient traitors. Her eyes were indifferent and condescending. Who do you think Jizhu belongs to? Musian raised his head and said calmly, Jizhu is the Jizhu of all living things. It's not that Tiandao came first and then all living things came, but living things gave birth to Tiandao. Tiandao stopped talking and looked at Musian quietly. She seemed to be stained with a strong sacred light. Her face was blurred, but solemn. Malang really surprised me, so you have been thinking about this from the beginning. When living things no longer fear me, my power will naturally weaken. She said coldly, but do you really think that when I was isolated from Jizhu, I didn't prepare any backup plans? The next moment, Tiandao slowly raised her clear eyes. In the borderless land, the wills of several Tiandao merged into one, and then turned into a golden ray of light, which quickly penetrated into Tiandao's body. The will of heaven contains the luck she has collected in the past, and this luck is enough for her to end this battle. Almost as soon as the will entered the body, the aura of Tiandao suddenly surged and returned to its peak state. However, just when Tiandao was about to sentence these rebellious ministers who resisted her, she suddenly felt countless fragments of scenes flashing through her mind. And those pictures are transmitting various information. It feels so good, Master is so powerful, I want to be my master's slave, I really want the aura of the natural furnace to fill my body, I want more. Countless messages were flowing in, and along with them, the overwhelming spiritual energy of the furnace poured into the body. The impact at that moment made Tiandao's legs tremble, his cheeks flushed, and he almost fell to the ground. And at this moment, under the sky, a dark and slender figure suddenly shot up. The black butterfly mark on Wei Mengru's right leg seemed to come alive, slowly floating towards the direction of heaven. Tiandao raised his head with difficulty and stared at Wei Mengru, original mother goddess. No. No, you are not the original mother goddess, you are a part of her. At this moment, Tiandao finally understood why concubine Shangyan was so weak. It was not just that concubine Shangyan's spiritual consciousness was worn away by the arrows of heaven, but a larger part of the reason was that her own past and future were integrated into this woman in the yellow dress. At this moment, the immortal devouring lock that emerged from Wei Mengru's right leg directly bound Tiandao. Musian suddenly shouted, Yuan Luo. A surging will finally descended from heaven and appeared in Kyushu. Tiandao suddenly raised his head and looked up, only to see a silver-haired loli appear in front of him. She was watching the heavenly Dao quietly. Under the sky, Tiandao's cheeks were still flushed. She suppressed the chaotic spiritual energy in her body and stared at the petite figure in front of her. Are you also a heavenly Dao? But I never noticed that you dash. Yuan Luo's expression was so indifferent that she had no emotion at all. It seemed that she was the real way of heaven at this moment, a new way of heaven without humanity. She said calmly, I have been in heaven in the past, waiting for the opportunity to replace you. If you must say it, I am your husband's little lover, right? For the first time, there was a hint of ridicule in her voice, and she slowly stretched out her hand towards Tiandao, I will take away the faith of the creatures in Kyushu from you. As for your personality, leave it to him to deal with it from now on. When the heavenly Dao was replaced by the new heavenly Dao, the calamity clouds under the sky seemed to be gradually dissipating. Under the blue sky, the sun is shining brightly. Above the 9 heavens, the new heavenly Dao Yuan Luo, wearing a snow-white dress, has replaced the old heavenly Dao and become the real heavenly Dao in Kyushu. She resumed her original posture as the royal sister and looked at Musian quietly. I have left the personality of the old heavenly Deo deep in the heavenly palace. She still has some power left, but she will no longer pose any threat. It's up to you to decide what to do with it. Musian nodded slightly. After a moment of silence, Yuen Luo spoke again. I'm leaving. From now on, I will replace the heavenly way of Kyushu and continue to enforce the rules of heaven and earth. At this time, she no longer had any human emotions. As she said at the beginning, her personality was modeled after other women. But now, there is no need to continue to retain the personality of Yuen Luo. The white skirt seemed to gradually turn into light particles and dissipate, followed by the shoes, and then her body seemed to slowly become transparent. Musian suddenly smiled and said, I'm leaving anyway, can you fulfill my wish before leaving? Yuen Luo looked at him in confusion until she noticed that his eyes were staring at her, and she seemed to understand something. Then he couldn't help but sigh, you are really hopeless. How could someone be in love with a ball of light? Do you have any special hobbies? Musian was about to say something, but at this moment, Yuen Luo had already taken a step forward, hugged Musian's neck, and gently kissed the boy's lips with her cold, soft red lips. Then, he slowly opened his bright red eyes and whispered, this is the last time. After she finished speaking, she turned around and was about to leave. Musian looked at her body that was gradually becoming transparent. He suddenly grabbed Yuen Luo's little hand, and before she could react, he lowered his head and kissed her red lips. The spiritual energy of the Tian furnace was continuously poured into her body, and Yuen Luo's gradually illusory figure was recondensing. She suddenly opened her red eyes, pushed him away, and said in disbelief, you know what you are doing. If I had my own personality, there would no longer be heaven to control order and rules in Kyushu. Do you know the consequences of doing that? Why does Kyushu have to have the way of heaven? Musian smiled, wouldn't it be nice to let them decide the future of Kyushu? So selfless, Yuen Luo said softly, but she raised her head and stared at him. Although his expression was calm, he seemed to be expecting his answer. At this moment, Musian noticed that several figures seemed to appear above the sky. It's Yao Meng and others. Don't they know to give some private space after the war? Musian felt the pressure in his heart instantly. But now the arrow is on the string, in order to keep Yuen Luo, he can only pretend not to notice everyone. Then, he lowered his head and stared at her seriously, saying, of course I am not so selfless. I just simply want my little Yuen Luo to stay with me forever. Yuen Luo's eyes gradually changed. Scumbag. Dead pervert, there are perverts who are in heat for the light ball, and they have been staring at other people's feet in the past. Do you like women's feet so much? Musian pondered for a moment, can you curse more? Estrus man, masochist, you hopeless foot control. Yuen Luo didn't know where she learned so many swear words, and she didn't repeat a word. It was just that under her pure and sweet voice, such curses seemed particularly beautiful, enough to make masochists excited to the extreme. Finally, she seemed tired, and her voice gradually disappeared. No more words, Musian smiled. There are more. She silently reached out and grabbed Musian's collar, and put her forehead on his chest. She raised her eyes, glanced at him with disgust, and then kissed Musian on the lips. After a while, she tiptoed, leaned over to the boy's ear, and whispered softly. Actually, I also want to be with you. Musian smiled with relief. Then, he hugged Yuen Luo's waist and turned his head to look at the fish behind him who were looking at him with a playful smile. For some reason, he suddenly felt a dull pain in his waist. According to the records of Juzhu in later generations, the way of heaven gave rise to human nature, causing the forbidden land to cause chaos in Juzhu. The Lord of the heavenly court came to the world, suppressed the unrest, and then ascended to the heavenly court with a group of monks. After that, there was no way of heaven in Jizhu. Musian felt very tired. He felt as if he had a dream. It was a beautiful dream. In the dream, he was sitting on a big bed deep in the heavenly palace, lying on Wei Mengru's thighs, with Naxi's heart covering his face, and Yao Meng and Ye Lingxian were sitting beside him. The sect master was sitting on the main seat, watching the fights below gently like a mother of the world, and there were many women beside him. They could even have a big party. In a trance, he faintly heard something, so he slowly opened his eyes. It was almost exactly the same as the scene in the picture. "Mu Lang, are you awake?" A cold and pleasant voice came to his ears. When Musian opened his eyes completely, he saw the slutty Bairuoxi kneeling beside him, looking at him gently. "What's going on?" Musian was stunned for a moment, and then his mind flooded with the memory of solving the heavenly Dao not long ago. After dealing with the heavenly Dao, in order to keep Yuan Luo, he confessed his love to her in front of everyone, and then successfully kept her by his side. After that, they ascended to the heavenly palace. At that time, he thought that he was the protagonist who had personally destroyed the Forbidden Land, so he could not suppress a few women. So, there was a big carnival in the heavenly palace. And then he slept until now. Although the spiritual energy of the heavenly palace can be replenished continuously, it seems that they are still a little reluctant. "Mu Lang should be okay, right?" Bairuoxi asked with concern. "You can't rest yet?" Musian. Looking at the weak and lovely Bairuoxi, and the many fish not far away, Musian fell into a brief contemplation. In the past, he always thought that if he defeated Yeyu, he would be able to become the protagonist of this world. But after finally defeating Yeyu, Xiaohua became the protagonist again. After solving Xiaohua, the heavenly Dao chose a new protagonist. In the end, he even killed the heavenly Dao, and the heroine label on his personal interface had long disappeared. This time, the protagonist will finally not jump in front of him again. However, these girls who were chosen by heaven became the protagonists, and even dared to ride on his face. As if he had given up, Musian sighed softly, then hugged Bairuoxi into his arms, but turned his head and kissed Wei Mengru's pretty face next to him. "Wait for me to ask the sect master's sister for some original spiritual energy, and then continue to suppress you." The first day of ascension to heaven, let's call it January 1st of the year in heaven. Starting today, I will write a diary to record my hard-working life, strive to practice hard and merge with the Tao as soon as possible, so as not to be too embarrassed for the Master of Heaven to only have the Enlightenment realm. On the night of January 1st, Nai 11 asked me to practice dual cultivation. I couldn't refuse her request, so I agreed, but I must practice hard starting tomorrow. January 2nd. On January 3rd, Sister Mengru disturbed my mind, and I suppressed her on the spot. Musian, Musian, you can't go on like this. January 3rd, double cultivation. January 4th, this time I swear to work hard to cultivate, and I can't indulge in the hearts of people and fall. January 5th, double cultivation. January 6th, after double cultivation, I began to practice seriously, but Yao Meng and Qianer came to visit me. This fairy kept rubbing against me in my arms and disturbing my mind. What a hateful fairy, I suppressed her tonight. January 7th, in-depth emotional communication with the sect leader's sister. January 8th, have a party. January 9th, I haven't had time to record these days because the party lasted for 5 days. January 15th, I released Tiandao's Yandere personality. She angrily said that she would take me away sooner or later, but was taken away by the sect leader's sister for private education. January 23rd, I really have no interest in women, I swear. February 3rd, have a party. February 6th, Luo Tan and Ling Xian's sister both ascended to heaven. I suddenly realized something today. I always thought I was the protagonist of this world, but recently I suddenly realized that I seemed to be a support from beginning to end, and I couldn't be the protagonist from the beginning. Because, they are the protagonists. Let's talk a little about why I chose the current ending. Originally, my plan was to let Musian solve the Forbidden Land through Tiendeo, weaken the combat power, and perform Mrs. Muse T art by the way, but everyone should remember October, when I closed the interpost for a whole month. I am an author who needs feedback before writing a book. It is not that I need to post in between, but seeing the intermission will give me more motivation to write. I was even a bit too busy that month. I was exhausted physically and mentally during that period, and I have only recovered recently. Another point is that this book has more than 3 million words, which can be considered a long novel at some point, and it is actually close to a limit on MOOC, because many readers don't like to read long novels, and even fewer can catch up to 4 or 5 million words. In addition, I have also seen some comments from book friends who said that they can't read it anymore and hope to see the ending as soon as possible. I hope everyone can be more harmonious about this, and everyone should be free to express their personal opinions. Later, I thought about it carefully. That's fine, I will write the ending to these book friends first, so that they can be satisfied to catch up with other books, and I can continue to write some content that I am interested in at the previous pace. I am still looking forward to the plot of the Heavenly Palace chapter, at least I have a lot of inspiration at present. See you tomorrow. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 662. Heaven. Musian slowly opened his eyes and felt the girl's ambiguous breath on his chest. He looked down and saw Ye Lingxian. After last night's tossing and turning, even the princess of the restricted area seemed to feel extremely tired, so that she fell asleep in Brother Mu's arms in the early morning of this day. Her left arm was tightly hugged by a pair of hands. If she turned her head slightly, she could see a girl in a slim and beautiful logo skirt sleeping beside her. Her pretty face had a charm of purity and charm. Her full breasts were very proud, and they were obviously much larger than her sister's. Yechian. Boring, what a boring life. Musian sighed lightly and turned his head to look at the woman on the other side. Even though she seemed to be in a deep sleep at this moment, her appearance was still charming and beautiful, and the little cinnabar between her eyebrows added a bit of fairy temperament. Of course, more importantly, in this fish pond, only Sister Yes heart can be compared with Nai 11. Ye King's Inn. Since suppressing the heavenly Dao, Musian has followed the previous agreement to let the Ye family of Juzhu ascend to heaven, which can be regarded as satisfying her past wishes. Although the heavenly palace is not as big as the heaven, it is at least half the size of Juzhu. Even if ordinary people spend their entire lives, they may not be able to reach the ends of the earth in the heavenly palace. Not to mention, the heavenly palace they are in is located above the 3 heavens of the heavenly palace. Obviously, they have successfully ascended to the fairyland, and even have the supply of heavenly palace spiritual energy all the time. Why do they still feel a little tired? Musian couldn't help but feel helpless when he thought of this. Spiritual energy, it can be said that it is the 3 meals a day for cultivators. Without spiritual energy, nothing can be done. And Musian is always blessed by the spiritual energy of the heavenly palace, so there is naturally no such thing as spiritual energy exhaustion. Unless, suppress the 3 human emperors in the Yahua realm at the same time. For example, Yao Meng and Nai 11, plus a linger from Longxing Ben, maybe only by suppressing the 3 at the same time can Musian's spiritual energy be exhausted. But the spiritual energy will not be exhausted, which does not mean that the spirit will not be exhausted. The spirit can only be replenished through meditation or sleep, which is inevitable. This will not happen only when practicing with Logo 10 or seeking spiritual energy from the sect master's sister. After all, the medicine emperor is also a natural furnace, and she can relieve Musian's exhausted spirit to some extent. And the sect master's sister, as the original mother goddess, Her original spiritual energy alone can repair his exhausted mental state. Musian slightly gathered his thoughts, quietly got up from the bed, changed into his own robes, and walked out of the room lazily. Outside the house, the snow was white, and the snow had already covered the yard, pavilions, and waterside pavilions, and plum blossoms were in full bloom. The rules of the heavenly court were in his control, but Musian would not change the rules at will, and in most cases he would let nature take its course. It's really a bit cold outside, it's really warm in Sister Yes' arms. Musian couldn't help but sigh, then raised his head and saw the yellow-skirted maid in the pavilion on the water. He couldn't help but smile and raise his hand to greet, "Sister Mengru, when did you wake up? Or was it at the door yesterday?" There was obviously some ridicule in the words, and Musian naturally didn't think that Wei Mengru would eavesdrop at the door all night. The water surface in winter has been frozen, and the dead trees are covered with snow, covered in silver. Wei Mengru glanced at the boy coldly, with a look of contempt. "Do you think I want to come to you? It's just that concubine Shangyan asked you to go to the hall of the heavenly palace to see her. I just came to inform you." The original spiritual energy can help Musian speed up the progress of cultivation. If nothing unexpected happens, concubine Shangyan asked him to find her for this matter. Musian was not in a hurry, but smiled and looked at the yellow-skirted maid. She always spoke in a condescending manner, with an arrogant look of "who cares about you?" But he could sense the jealousy in Wei Mengru's words. Sister Mengru was still as arrogant as ever. Musian reached out and held one of her little hands, and asked with concern, "Why are your hands so cold? Are you catching a cold?" Even Wei Mengru was speechless after hearing this. Can a great man in the Hedeo realm catch a cold? He looked like he was looking at an idiot. However, Musian naturally hugged her waist tightly, fully feeling the tenderness of the maid's body, and whispered, "When I come back, I will use the natural furnace to help you practice." The sudden tenderness made Wei Mengru obviously a little uncomfortable. She couldn't help biting her red lips and made a shy but resentful voice, Who needs your help? It's enough for you to take good care of other women. After all, if it weren't for the existence of the heavenly Dao, you probably would have been in the basement now." Now, although the permission of the old heavenly Dao of Zhu has been replaced by Yuan Luo, you should know that Yuan Luo is now in the heavenly court and has not become the heavenly Dao of Zhu. Now Zhu is in a period without the heavenly Dao, only the rules of heaven and earth left in the past, and the creatures are the masters of their own house. And now there are two heavenly Daos in the heavenly court. In this case, in order to avoid accidents, it is naturally better to have fewer internal conflicts. Seeing that Musian had fallen silent, Wei Mengru felt that her words had probably frightened the young man. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and she was about to continue speaking. However, at this time, Musian looked down at her eyes and said softly, "Sister Mengru may not need me, but I need Sister Mengru." The words that were about to be said suddenly fell silent, and Wei Mengru fell into silence for a long time. He gently kissed the maid's red lips painted with sexy rouge, and whispered, "Wait for me in the room at night." After that, he went straight to the hall of the heavenly palace. But when he was about to arrive at the hall of the heavenly palace, Musian suddenly felt that someone was staring at him from behind, so he turned his head and looked. There was no one behind him, only heavy snow falling from the sky. "I am really neurotic, this is the heavenly palace, who can hide their movements from me?" Musian couldn't help shaking his head and smiling, secretly sighing that he would be so weird, and then walked straight into the hall of the heavenly palace. In the hall, the sister of the sect leader, who was wearing a white dress like a wedding, was sitting on a white jade chair, playing chess with her senior sister. Compared to the sect master, Lan Murian's dress is more cold and beautiful, and behind her, her sister Lan Feiying, wearing a fiery red cheongsam, is watching her sister and the sect master's chess game. Yao Meng sat on the side and watched the two of them play chess boredly, and next to her were Yao Yu, the saint of Yaoqi, and Lin Qiu, a sickly girl from Swanyan Palace. Bai Ruoxi, whose clothes were particularly in line with the snowy scenery at this time, sat behind Shang Yanfei, as cold and weak as ever. The proud chest that could be placed on the table set off the white snowy palace skirt to the fullest, and people felt shocked at first sight. "Mr. Mu, you are here." Lin Qiu, who saw Musian at a glance, immediately raised her little hand and greeted him with a faint smile. Then she walked towards him in small steps. However, I don't know if it was because she was too careless or what, she accidentally stumbled and fell in the direction of Musian. Musian reacted very quickly and supported the pretty and sickly girl, and said calmly, "Are you okay?" Although she was frightened, Lin Qiu was no longer afraid in Mr. Mu's arms. She snuggled in his warm chest and whispered, "Sorry, my Swanyan body has been so troublesome." "I'm glad you're okay," Musian smiled. Swanyan body is indeed weak, but how could Lin Qiu, who is almost at the peak of returning to the void, be so weak that she can't even walk steadily? However, some things are not interesting after being exposed, and Musian still understands it. At this time, Bai Ruoxi trotted over with a caring look on his face, supported Lin Qiu and said, "Miss Lin, are you okay?" "It's okay, I just felt a little tired just now." Lin Qiu forced a smile, with a white flower pinned between her hair, and the most attractive thing was the always sick and sad look on her face, which would cause men to pity for no reason. Bai Ruoxi, who had no bad intentions, looked at Lin Qiu with a gentle look that saw through everything, and said softly, "Mu Lang, since Miss Lin is not feeling well, I'll send her back to her room first and then come to you." Lin Qiu's eyes flickered slightly, and she smiled lightly, "It's all right now. Miss Lin should still take care of her health. I'll send you back first. Anyway, there's nothing important today." Bai Ruoxi interrupted very firmly, with a look of concern on her face, which made it difficult for Lin Qiu to refuse. She could only nod softly, and a faint smile appeared on her face. "Then I'll trouble Ruoxi." But when she lowered her eyes slightly, there was a little more darkness in her beautiful eyes. "Tisk, what a tricky woman." She smiled at Bai Ruoxi, and the cold and weak eldest lady also smiled gently and lovely. In just one encounter, the two of them had completed a round of tea art exchange, which was really terrible. Musian saw through everything but didn't say it, so as not to cause trouble. At this moment, Sister Kingdi and the others are still watching, so we can't let them get jealous. He just had a party a few days ago, and his spirit has not yet fully recovered. He needs to slow down. Just as Musian was walking towards Yao Meng with a smile, he suddenly heard a surprised voice from the gate of the heavenly palace, "Who are you?" Musian turned his head subconsciously. Not far from the heavenly palace, Bai Ruoxi, who was about to leave with Lin Qiu, suddenly stopped. She raised her hand and made a gesture, blocking a strange girl with sword energy. The strange girl was wearing a white dress and looked young. She had loose hair and clear eyes. Musian had only seen such eyes on Lin Ling. At this moment, the strange girl looked a little at a loss. She first looked at Bai Ruoxi, and then looked straight at Musian. She was obviously a very strange girl, but for some reason, Musian felt that she was particularly familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. Yao Meng raised her eyebrows slightly, and looked at the girl in front of her with some doubt. Could it be that she accidentally broke in from somewhere in the heavenly palace? There are more people who ascended in the heavenly palace than just them, but it is reasonable to say that not everyone can enter the heavenly palace. After all, there are restrictions on the rules of the heavenly palace, and most people cannot enter the heavenly palace. So where did this girl come from? "What's your name?" After Lan Murian and her sister looked at each other, her cold eyes fell on the girl in front of her. She tried to soften her tone as much as possible, because she always felt that this girl looked inexplicably kind. For a moment, everyone present seemed to be attracted by this girl, because it was so rare for someone to break into the heavenly palace. Muzian also had some doubts and said to himself, is there something wrong with the heavenly palace rules I set before? Otherwise, it would not make sense for a girl with a cultivation level of only the third level of return to void to break into the heavenly palace. Muzian used his eyes to signal Byruoxi to untie the sword formation. A cultivator in the return to void realm naturally did not have to worry, and Byruoxi also raised her hand to untie the sword formation that sealed the strange girl. Under the gaze of everyone, the girl seemed a little scared. She was wearing a white dress that symbolized purity, revealing a small section of her snow-white calves, and a pair of low-heeled sandals on her feet. Then, she trotted and hid behind Muzian. Under the gaze of several people in the heavenly palace, she looked up at Muzian timidly and whispered, "Dad. The update frequency may be a little slower, after all, there is no time to post now. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 663. Father? The girl's timid cry was clear and sweet, but in everyone's minds it was like a bolt from the blue. Even the chess pieces in concubine Shangyan's hand fell on the chessboard subconsciously. Her spiritual sense locked onto everyone, and when she confirmed that no one was paying attention, she changed the positions of the two chess pieces without leaving a trace, and then she turned her attention to the place in front of her. A pretty and lovely-looking girl. Not only concubine Shangyan, but also Yao Meng also narrowed his eyes at this moment. Byruoxi looked at Muzian with gentle eyes, but there was a hint of darkness in her gentle eyes. Lin Ling, who had been eating melon quietly beside him, was stunned. He didn't even notice that the big meat bun in his hand fell to the ground and rolled around. She blinked her red eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Lan Mulian's pretty face was covered with frost, while her younger sister Lan Feiying looked at the boy intriguingly. Lin Qiu's weak posture that he had always maintained was also a little unbearable at this moment. He opened his eyes wide and felt a little unbelievable. Dad. When did he have an affair with a woman outside and give birth to a girl? Is it even that big? Byruoxi finally came to her senses after being stunned for a long time, walked to the girl's side, bent down and gently touched her silky hair, and said softly, "Good boy, what's your name?" The girl looked at Byruoxi's plump breasts and trembled for a few times, swallowed her saliva, and said softly, "Ruo, Ruruo." She looked to be only 13 or 14 years old. She was wearing a simple long dress and a pair of small and exquisite low-heeled sandals. She was cute and cute. He lowered his head slightly and buried his face in Muzian's arms. His eyes were as transparent as a deer's, showing shyness and fear. Everyone present looked at Muzian silently. Yao Meng said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to secretly have a child with someone else outside. She looks like she should be about 13 years old. It seems that she is the child from the time in Tianqian City." Byruoxi said softly, "Mu Lang harmed many girls when he was in Tianqian City, but there were still many women who fell in love with him because of his face, and were even willing to give their bodies to him. When did Su not do it well? As a safety measure, just give birth to a child." Although the tone was understatement, it suddenly made the atmosphere much colder. Lan Mulian looked at the master beside him and said softly, "Is this matter within master's expectation?" However, as soon as she asked, she knew that there was no need to ask. Because concubine Shangyan was looking at the cute girl in front of her with doubt at the moment. She was obviously very surprised by the sudden appearance of a daughter. A charming smile appeared on Lan Feiying's charming face. She looked at Muzian a few times and said softly, "Although I knew you were flirtatious when we were in Tianqian City before, I still didn't expect that you would secretly have sex with me. Someone else had a child and brought it to heaven without telling them." and it was hidden for nearly 3 months without anyone discovering it. Yes, nearly 3 months have passed since they ascended to heaven. In the past 2 months, apart from meditating and practicing, I have also been playing chess with each other, or sneaking in some butter. The life was quite colorful. I just didn't expect that without anyone knowing, this guy actually had a child. And they are already so big. For a moment, several eyes in the heavenly palace fell on Musian involuntarily. But Musian was a little confused. He looked down at the girl who was hugging his thigh and refused to let go. He couldn't help but said softly, "Little sister, where did you come from? Don't say this nonsense. If you accidentally send me to a small dark room later," Musian couldn't help but curse in his heart. I still don't know if he has children. It has been more than 3 months since I left Kyushu. In just 3 months, he could have a 13 or 14-year-old daughter. Not to mention how old he is this year. Even if he really has a child, how did she appear in heaven? Musian didn't believe it at all, and even wondered if it was the Yandere Tiendeo who was behind it. Or maybe Yuoluo was teasing herself. Sensing Musian's obviously suspicious gaze, Mururuo raised his head and looked at the boy pitifully, like a child abandoned by his parents, weak and helpless. But Musian felt that this look was extremely familiar. That pitiful and helpless expression, as well as those moist little eyes, are exactly the same as Bairuoxi's. As if aware of the dangerous gazes of the women behind her, the girl hid behind Musian with some fear. Then he said weakly, I am your daughter." Musian obviously didn't believe it. "No way, I can't have such a big child." "But I am really your daughter." Mururuo was anxious and looked at him with soft and weak eyes. "If you don't believe it, you can use your spiritual sense to scan my body to confirm." Before Musian could confirm, a soft and sweet voice came from not far away, "No need to confirm, she is indeed Mulang's child." Yao Meng slowly opened his eyes and withdrew his spiritual consciousness from Mururuo's body. She was wearing a cyan dress, and a pair of small, white, well-proportioned feet peeked out from under the skirt. The feet did not touch the ground, stepping on the void, and walked step by step in front of the girl. Then, he bent down slightly, reached out and gently stroked the girl's soft hair, and said in a gentle voice that was enough to make people feel at ease, "You said your name is Mururuo, right?" Mururuo pecked her head like a chicken. "This is the name my father gave me." Musian couldn't help but said, "I can't have a daughter this old." "I came from the future," Mururuo said. Musian was stunned. The future? All along, Musian thought that only Shang Yanfei had such an ability. But after hearing her words at this moment, Musian inexplicably believed it a little. After all, only in this way can it explain why Mururuo called him dad and had a blood relationship with him. But I didn't expect that this girl actually had similar abilities to the sect master's sister. In fact, when he saw Mururuo's eyes just now, Musian had already believed it a little. A person's eyes will not lie, not to mention that Mururuo knew that she couldn't lie in front of so many big guys. Coming from the future. I never thought that my first child in the future would be a daughter, and she looks so cute at such a young age. She will definitely be very beautiful when she grows up. After a brief shock, Musian soon felt more emotional, and couldn't help but gently stroke Mururuo's soft hair, but he didn't notice that after hearing the word daughter, the eyes of the people present never moved away from Mururuo from beginning to end. Until some time, Shang Yanfei suddenly asked casually, "You just said that your father is Musian, right?" Mururuo pecked her head like a chicken. Shang Yanfei changed the subject, "Then who is your mother?" As soon as this was said, the eyes of the people present fell on the girl. Guess whose child this is? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 664. Your name is Mururuo, with the word Ruo in your name. Could it be that your mother is Bairuoxi? Linkia glanced at Miss Bai, who had small breasts, and her little face was filled with suspicion. Concubine Shangyan put down the chess piece in her hand, walked up to Miruruo, and looked down at the big Lolita in front of her. Miruruo held Musian's thigh with one hand and hid half of her head behind him, looking timidly at the stunning beauty in front of her. "What's wrong? Am I so terrible?" Concubine Shangyan couldn't help but smile and reached out to touch Miruruo's hair, but she took the first step and hid behind Musian, holding his thigh with her little hands and refusing to let go. "My intuition tells me that you just had bad intentions towards me." Then, the girl's soft voice sounded softly. As soon as these words came out, almost everyone present was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at Lin Ling, who was still stunned by the appearance of his daughter. Sensing everyone's gaze, Lin Ling suddenly came back to her senses and looked at this slender-looking girl. She tilted her head slightly, her innocent red eyes reflecting Miruruo's petite figure. Miruruo also looked at her, her beautiful eyes reflecting the innocent face of the silver-haired beauty. Lin Ling walked up to Miruruo, thought for a moment, took out a butter paper bag containing fish meatballs from Naja, took out a mouthful and handed it to her. Miruruo hesitated for a moment, smelled the aroma of the food, and couldn't help but swallow her saliva. She looked at Musian, then at Lin Ling, and finally opened her mouth and bit into the meatball. At this time, Lin Ling looked at Miruruo's sweet and cute little face and couldn't help but tentatively stretched out her hand towards her. Miruruo did not move back any further and allowed Lin Ling's hand to stroke her hair. It seems that the spirit dragon is not only naturally close to all things, but even children are close to her. Concubine Shangyan looked at the scene quietly and couldn't help but whisper. There seemed to be a little helplessness in the originally indifferent tone. As the original mother goddess, it stands to reason that all living things should be close to her. As a result, when facing a little girl, this sense of closeness was completely useless. At this time, Bairuoxi suddenly frowned and said, "Could it be that she is willing to get close to Senior Lin Ling because she is Senior Lin Ling's child?" When he said this, he looked at Musian with a faint look. His little eyes looked full of resentment, as if to say, "Obviously I am Mu Lang's first Taoist monk, but Mu Lang's first child turned out to be, it's someone else's. It shouldn't be possible, right? If it was Senior Lin Ling, Ruruo should have called her mother just now." At this time, Yao Yu, who had been silent, also spoke. She immediately discovered this easily detectable problem. Lan Feiying also looked at the girl curiously for a few times, and then suddenly chuckled, "Actually, she may not be Senior Lin Ling. I think her facial features are somewhat similar to her sister." Hearing this, several people present couldn't help but compare their faces with those of Miruruo and Lan Mulian. Senior sister Len Yan, who had been sitting quietly and dignifiedly in her seat, was suddenly led by her younger sister. Coupled with the gazes of these people, Len Yan's pretty face couldn't help but blush slightly, and she glared at Lan Feiying, "Don't talk nonsense, I can't have it the child's." She could never imagine that she and her junior brother would have a child. Lan Feiying still had a teasing smile and said, "Sister, take a look for yourself, my eyebrows are indeed quite similar to yours." "Don't talk nonsense, it's impossible, my junior brother and I can't have children." The senior sister really brought her arrogance to the extreme, and her mouth was really tough. Even Mu Jian, who was originally a little worried about entering the small dark room, couldn't help but secretly complain. Lan Mulian seemed to know what Musian was thinking, and couldn't help but glare at him, looking a little embarrassed. But soon after, his eyes fell on Miruruo involuntarily. After looking at it for a while, an idea suddenly came to my mind. "It seems, really similar?" Lan Feiying looked at her sister with a smile and said, "Does my sister also think they are similar?" As if her mind was broken, Lan Mulian quickly looked away and said calmly, "I don't feel it." As he spoke, he quickly added, "Instead of guessing here, it would be better for her to tell her who her mother is." Hearing this, Everyone's eyes couldn't help but look at Miruruo. The petite and exquisite girl hid on Musian's body again as if she was very frightened, and whispered, I can't reveal my identity. If I reveal my destiny, I will suffer the backlash of cause and effect. But my mother is a very beautiful woman, and my father himself said that my mother is his favorite. Miruruo seemed a little proud when she said this. Musian's heart skipped a beat, and he had a bad feeling in his heart. As expected, Yao Meng couldn't help but narrowed his eyes when he heard this, and said with a smile, Mu Lang seemed to have said that I was his most beloved woman before. It seems like this child might be hers. However, at this time, Lan Mulian's calm voice came from behind, that's a coincidence. He had said before that I was his most beloved woman in the section. In the slightly silent atmosphere, Bairuoxi tilted her head slightly and looked at Musian softly, her beautiful eyes filled with watery light. Pitiful, Mu Lang, do you remember what you said to me before? Shang Yanfei smiled faintly and looked at the boy, you have many women you love the most. Musian's scalp tingled. Is this kid here to cheat his father? He couldn't help but look at Miruruo, coughed lightly, and changed the subject stiffly. By the way, you came back from the future to the present, is there something wrong? For example, something happened in the future. Miruruo shook her head gently, I just took a nap and found myself here when I woke up. When she said this, she stretched out her white little hand, grabbed one of Musian's hands, and whispered, Dad, mothers are not going to lock us in the basement together, right? Ruruo is so scared. Musian was stunned for a moment and subconsciously looked at Miruruo. The girl was looking up at him pitifully, with a delicate and weak expression, skin whiter than snow, lips as pink as cherries, and a weak and helpless look. Wearing a long dress with a front opening, although she was still young, she seemed to have the demeanor of a little beauty. Musian rubbed her smooth hair and said, It's okay, your mothers are very gentle and won't do anything to you. But they might do something to me. After all, the appearance of Miruruo directly affected the hearts of everyone present, and now they all wanted to know whose child it was. Yao Meng looked at Miruruo meaningfully. Bairuoxi's expression also moved slightly, and she looked at this daughter from the future with a strange look. She just smelled a faint scent of tea. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 665. With years of polishing tea art, Miss Bai smelled a similar tea fragrance on Bairuruo at the first time. Then, she looked at the girl in front of her who was holding Musian and burying her head in his arms, and her eyes became more and more gentle. This tea art, and this name, this daughter must be hers. At this time, Shang Yanfei suddenly smiled and said, Since Ruruo is so uneasy now, then you can send her back to rest for the time being, and we will see how to send her back to the future later. I will also deduce during this period to see whose child she is. Because of the appearance of Miruruo, Musian is also eager to leave quickly. His many years of experience in the small dark room told him that if he continued to stay here, there might be a river of blood here later. The appearance of Miruruo touched the nerves of everyone present. Originally, everyone had no idea about the child, but now with the appearance of this child, it seems that they have some thoughts. If things continue to develop, it might turn into a palace drama where whoever has the child has the advantage. And Miruruo likes to talk about dangerous topics that can easily cause people to fight. Send her away quickly, this is the only thought in Musian's heart at the moment. Ruruo, I'll take you back to rest first, okay? Musian thought of this, bent down and gently touched the girl's head, and said in a gentle voice. Miruruo stretched out her little hand to hold Musian's arm, raised her head and looked at him timidly, then can you accompany Ruruo? Ruruo is afraid to be alone. Musian nodded calmly, and then took her away. The moment she walked out of the hall, Miruruo's original fear gradually faded, and a flash of joy appeared on her little face. Soon she regained her weak posture, looked at Muzian worriedly, and whispered, "The mother's eyes were so scary just now, will they embarrass daddy later?" "Don't worry, it's okay," Muzian said gently. "At most, I will accompany them to have a party, and at worst, I will go to the small dark room for interrogation." When Muzian thought of this, he couldn't help but sigh secretly. Who does this child look like? Why does he have to learn tea art when there are so many other things to learn? If the mothers really do something to you, Ruruo will definitely help you, Ruruo said seriously, hugged Muzian's arm affectionately, and gently rubbed his arm with her face. "Well, good child." Muzian smiled, thinking that you don't have to help me with anything, just don't cheat daddy next time. Walking on the forest paved with stone paths, Muzian looked at the lush green forest and the lakeside at the end of the forest, leisurely enjoying the scenery while holding Mururuo's hand. On the way back, he was also thinking about who the child's mother was. This name is a bit like Naxi, and the personality seems to be a bit like Naxi when she was a child. But if it was really Naxi, Ruruo should have called her mother at that time, right? In addition to Naxi, what other women in the fish pond are proficient in tea art? Muzian fell into a brief contemplation. In Muzian's mind, among these fish including the great shark, the most proficient in tea art should be the sect leader's sister, Bairuoxi and Yao Meng. Others may have some tea art on them, but they are still a little bit behind. Gong Lianyu and Yehuang's sister, who are both in the Yehua realm, are both more direct. They are too lazy to fight in the palace and belong to the type of people who will hum you if they say hum you. The difference is that the former is a tsundere, while the latter is a queen. In addition, the princess and her best friend Luo Tan have also ascended to heaven. Muzian doesn't know much about their tea art, but he thinks his daughter should not be theirs. Just as he was thinking about this, Mururuo suddenly tugged at Muzian's sleeves, then slowly squatted down. Muzian stopped and turned to look at the girl behind him. She was squatting on the ground with her knees hugged, her half-long hair spread to her waist, and her soft forehead hair slightly blocked her eyes. "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" Muzian asked. "The breath of my mother's was terrible just now. I still feel so scared when I think about it now. My legs are a little weak," she said weakly. "Then let's rest for a while nearby." No, Mururuo shook her head gently, and she buried her face in her knees, so her expression could not be seen. "So having a child is so troublesome," Muzian patiently asked softly, "what should I do?" Although it is troublesome, he just can't feel disgusted. I don't know if it's because the girl in front of him is good looking and can act like a spoiled child, or because of her special relationship with him. Mururuo pursed her lips, suppressing the smile that wanted to be raised. She raised her head, revealing her innocent and cute little face, then opened her hands and said in a coquettish tone, "Take me back." Muzian hesitated. "You are so old, and you are in the return to Void Realm now, right? It's not appropriate." Speaking of which, he is only 12 or 13 years old and has already returned to the Void Realm. It can be seen that Mururuo may have been in the refining spirit or even the return to Void Realm when she was born. It's really outrageous. Muzian sighed in his heart. "No, take me back." She raised her eyes, and there seemed to be mist in her beautiful eyes, looking at him pitifully. Muzian. For a moment, he seemed to see Linling in the girl's glass-clear eyes. Linling's coquettishness was the most helpless for Muzian, and now there was Mururuo. Muzian sighed helplessly, squatted down, and put his hands behind his back to signal, "Come up. Daddy is so nice." Mururuo happily stood up and came behind Muzian, then took small steps and sat directly on his shoulders. Muzian was stunned for a moment. He originally expected to carry the girl on his back, but he didn't expect Mururuo to sit directly on his shoulders. And her legs were weak, but now they are not weak. Let's go see Sister Luo Tan." At this time, Mururuo gently touched Muzian's hair, and then pointed to the lake at the end of the forest trail in front. At this point, Musian could only hold her calves on both sides and then go to the forest at the end of the trail. At the same time, in the heavenly palace. Because of Mururuo's appearance, the people present had no mood to play chess, nor did they notice who won or lost in the game between Shang Yanfei and Qingdi. The women present all looked at Shang Yanfei. She closed her eyes at this time. Her white dress was luxurious and gorgeous, revealing a pair of attractive white shoulders, and her white silk gloves as thin as cicada wings vaguely revealed the tenderness of her skin. She exuded an incomparably sacred aura, shining brightly, quite good. Behind Shang Yanfei appeared two fish, one black and one white, which just formed a black and white Tai Chi diagram. Boom! In the dark, it seemed that the vibration of the avenue came, and the black and white yin and yang fish also produced spiritual fluctuations. She was deducing the origin of Mururuo. Among the people present, there were many people who could deduce the secrets of heaven, but only Shang Yanfei could do it to the degree of accuracy of Shang Yanfei, and even not be backfired by cause and effect. At this moment, everyone was staring at Shang Yanfei, even Lin Ling was looking forward to it, with a pair of red eyes shining at the sister of the sect leader, and couldn't wait to know who Mururuo's mother was. She felt a little regretful when she first saw Mururuo, because she felt that the child should not be hers. But then she thought that no matter whose child it was his child, and thinking this way, Lin Ling felt that it was completely acceptable. Bairuoxi was also looking forward to it, because she felt that Mururuo should be her child from the girl's name, personality and even art. Lan Murian also peeked at her master. Although she didn't care whether Mururuo was her daughter, she still cared about who the mother of her junior brother's first daughter was. What if it was really her? Just thinking about it, Lan Murian's expression was a little complicated, but for some reason, she felt inexplicably ashamed and expectant in her heart. Until she noticed her sister's teasing eyes, Lan Murian reacted, a faint blush swept across her cold face, and she pretended to be indifferent and retracted her gaze. At this time, the yin-yang fish stopped rotating, and the spiritual energy that Shang Yanfei was running slowly dissipated. Then, the woman slowly opened her gentle and moving eyes. She looked around at everyone, and swept across Lin Qiu, Yao Mang, Lin Ling, Yao Yu, her own disciples, and Lan Feiying one by one, and then her eyes fell on the big-breasted Miss Bai. "It's your child." Shang Yanfei looked at Bairuoxi and said softly. Although he had been mentally prepared for a long time, Bairuoxi couldn't help but reveal a shy and happy smile when he heard Shang Yanfei's answer. However, before Bairuoxi could speak, Shang Yanfei continued, "However, although it is your child, Mururuo is not yours." Huh? Bairuoxi was stunned for a moment. "Not born by me, but my daughter?" Shang Yanfei smiled faintly and said, "To be precise, Mururuo is not the daughter of any of us, she is not even any of the women he knows." Lan Murian raised her eyebrows slightly. "Since it is Bairuoxi's child, why does Master say it is not her child?" Shang Yanfei smiled faintly, looked at the fairy in a green dress who was sitting lazily in the void, and said with a smile, "It seems that the Green Emperor knows." Yao Meng glanced at Shang Yanfei faintly, and then raised his head to look at the sky outside the heavenly palace. "The heavenly Dao is playing tricks, right? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 666. Although she is related to Bairuoxi by blood, she is not actually her child. To be able to do this, it can only be the work of the heavenly Dao. After all, the heavenly Dao can analyze and imitate the personality traits of any fish in the fish pond and mix them together. If she wants, she can also transform into any person. There is no doubt that Mururuo was born in this way. After Bairuoxi understood everything, she felt inexplicably complicated and didn't know whether to be happy or angry. She was happy because Mururuo was indeed her child, she was angry because the child was not hers, but she was related to her by blood. This child should have been created by the heavenly Dao after the heavenly Dao transformed into Bairuoxi's appearance. I didn't expect Yuan Luo to be able to do this. It's really surprising. After being silent for an unknown period of time, Shang Yanfei spoke softly to break the silence. Even she was a little shocked by the heavenly Dao's operation. Not only did she transform into someone else's appearance, but she also used some method to give birth to a daughter. What on earth does the heavenly Dao want to do? In the north, Muzian carried the big Lolita on his back and walked into the quiet little garden. On both sides, there were unknown flowers and plants in full bloom, towering ancient trees rising from the ground, with emerald green leaves, and faintly emitting crystal light, which was quite good. In the little garden was an attic, facing the small pond, and a gorgeous woman in a luxurious dress was sitting cross-legged above the pond, meditating with her eyes closed. "Why are you studying these flowers and plants all day long? Wouldn't it be faster to practice if you go directly to him to absorb the spiritual energy of the natural furnace?" There was also a plump and graceful woman sitting by the pond, with a hazy veil on her face, and a plain skirt wrapped around her delicate body. Under the veil, a noble and gentle oval face could be vaguely seen, and a gorgeous jade hairpin was inserted in the complicated bun. The beautiful wife's gentle eyes looked at her best friend helplessly at this time. Luo Tan opened his eyes and looked at his best friend with a smile. "The spiritual energy in the heavenly palace is extremely rich. The flowers and plants that I couldn't cultivate in Zhuzhou in the past can now grow naturally here. In fact, it is all because of the spiritual energy of the heavenly palace." "Princess, but what's the use of cultivating these natural treasures?" Luo Tan pondered for a moment and said, "I like it." "Princess." Before ascending to the heavenly palace, she thought that she and her best friend would join forces to fascinate that guy. But who would have thought that after ascending to the heavenly palace, the woman next to her began to cultivate herself and become obsessed with flowers and plants, and did not participate in the party at all. "If you want him so much, go find him. Why do you have to wait for me?" Luo Tan stood up with an elegant step, casually cut off the extra branches and leaves with scissors, and said, "In fact, you don't have to go find him. Maybe he will come by himself at any time. Besides, it's only been half a month since the last time you were intimate with him. Or has Her Royal Highness become a woman who is unsatisfied and needs the comfort of that little man day and night since the death of Emperor Daipen?" When Luo Tan said the last sentence, he raised his beautiful eyes with a smile and looked over, with a teasing smile in his eyes. "Why do you mention Daipen Guang for no reason? I have nothing to do with him." The princess rolled her eyes at her bestie and continued, "But are you really not worried that he will be obsessed with other women, and even forget you in the end? If he has another child, it will be even more troublesome." Luo Tan's gorgeous eyes were filled with a smile, and he pursed his lips and said, "You think too much. He said before that he doesn't want children for the time being. You said so much, but you still want the furnace spirit energy, right? To put it more bluntly, you are greedy for his body. Speaking of which, Daipen Emperor is the Lord of Yunzhou. His previous attack on him is equivalent to Yunzhou being his enemy. As the Princess of Yunzhou, you can apologize to him on behalf of Yunzhou, appease him and satisfy him. There is nothing wrong with that." The princess couldn't help but glare at Luo Tan with resentment, and said, "What about you? You just leave your own immortal dynasty alone and come to the heavenly court to be lazy, is it okay?" Luo Tan smiled and said, "I don't have to deal with most of the government affairs at ordinary times. Besides, it's not impossible for him to come to the 9 provinces after ascending to the heavenly court. I will go back every once in a while." She paused slightly, looked at the dignified and gentle princess, and continued, "In fact, You don't have to worry, he can't forget you. Maybe he will come to see you tonight. Her tone was full of confidence, and she knew Musian's character well. The charming and graceful beauty glanced at Luo-Tan on the side and said, if you continue to cultivate yourself like this, I'm afraid you won't be interested in dual cultivation in the future. Luo-Tan looked around the quiet little garden and said leisurely, who told you that I'm not interested? It's just that occasionally being apart for a while will increase the feeling of missing each other. Luo-Tan smiled faintly and said, although you are a married woman, you don't know as much about the relationship between men and women as I do. The princess frowned slightly, a little unconvinced. However, just when she was about to speak, she seemed to notice something and subconsciously looked up at the end of the quiet path in front. There, a familiar figure was gradually coming into view. Luo-Tan gave her best friend a look, as if to say, look, what did I say? It seems that she knows Musian a little better than herself, although the princess's face is always gentle and moving, she can't help but sigh in her heart. Although she is the fiancée of the great Peng Emperor, she first learned about the love between men and women from Musian. When Luo-Tan was in charge of the immortal dynasty, she arranged marriages for many royal dignitaries, and she obviously knew much more about the love between men and women than she did. Huh? Is he still carrying a girl? At this time, the princess suddenly saw something vaguely and whispered to herself subconsciously. Luo-Tan narrowed his eyes and looked up. I saw a young man in a white robe carrying a cute girl on his back. The girl had straight half-long hair, a simple and gorgeous long skirt, a dignified oval face, and a pair of peach blossom eyes with innocence. She was dressed in the youthful age that a girl should have. She sat on Musian's shoulders, holding his head with both hands, and her white and slender legs swayed gently under her skirt. It's so rare, this guy actually brought a girl to see me. Sensing the princess's silent glance, and the meaning of is this what you said everything is under control, in her eyes, Luo-Tan smiled lightly and said, I haven't seen this girl before. Maybe he has changed his taste recently, or maybe he is going out to play with a girl from the Ye or Mu tribe. When helping Ye Kingzin's entire clan ascend, Musian also ascended with the former Mu tribe, but these families did not live in the heavenly palace. However, some girls in the tribe who were in love would often invite Musian to go out and play together. Most of the time he would refuse, this time he agreed, and brought a girl here, which was quite rare. But this girl is indeed very delicate and beautiful. Among the countless girls Luo-Tan has seen, she can be said to be the top one. It just seems that she is a little young. Did this guy awaken some strange hobby? Although he was thinking, Luo-Tan still looked up at Musian with an elegant smile, and was about to say hello. At this time, Mururuo secretly glanced at Luo-Tan, and then glanced at the beautiful wife in a plain skirt, and then said happily, Dad, are we there yet? Luo-Tan's smile gradually solidified on his face. The princess on the side stared at Musian in shock, her eyes a little dull. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 667. Luo-Tan's first reaction was, this guy actually let such a cute little girl call him daddy? This guy has already played so big? But soon after looking at Mururuo's face several times, Luo-Tan's eyes changed slightly. How come this face shape looks so similar to his? She wanted to think about it, but the Empress still maintained her elegant posture and asked with a smile, who is this child? At the same time, the princess on the side also looked at Mururuo several times. She was naturally close to the Dao and was extremely sensitive to other people's auras. At this moment, she had keenly felt a very familiar aura. It was an aura that seemed to be connected to Musian's bloodline. Before Musian could speak, Mururuo glanced at Luo-Tan first, and then timidly shouted, Sister Luo-Tan, Sister Princess. The little mouth is quite sweet. Luo-Tan's beautiful eyebrows relaxed a little, and then he stepped aside to let Mururuo, who was riding on his shoulders, Musian, come in. Anyway, you guys come in first. I happen to have planted some enlightenment tea recently. If you don't mind, let's drink it together. After walking through the quiet courtyard and garden for about a quarter of an hour, a pavilion with curtains hanging on all sides appeared vaguely in front of it. Musian was sitting under the pavilion, his eyes falling on Luo Tan, who was making tea not far away. She was wearing the same luxurious white dress with gold and silver threads, her hair was tied up with a jade hairpin, and a gold walking stick was inserted in her hair. She was wearing a pair of exquisite snow-white knee-high boots, which added a bit of noble and elegant temperament. Mururuo glanced at Musian, her little hand subconsciously grasped the hem of her skirt, her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly, and she suddenly regretted letting her father come to Luo Tan's place. The Medicine Emperor is a natural furnace, and has an excellent physique related to heaven, materials, and earth treasures. The heaven materials and earth treasures she cultivates are full of fragrance, so Mururuo always likes to eat and drink at Luo Tan's place. Especially the enlightenment tree she cultivated, with the blessing of heavenly aura, a few pieces can be picked every other year, and it is even more delicious when used to make tea. However, Mururuo ignored an extremely important thing. Luo Tan didn't know her at this time, and it seemed that she hadn't been close to Musian for a while. Bringing Musian here now was like saying, "Sister, I'm sending my dad here." There you have it. Mururuo sat obediently, stretched out a small hand and secretly pulled the corner of Musian's clothes, and whispered in his ear, "How about we go back? The girl has a faint fragrance, paired with her cute face, which is enough to make anyone who sees her feel pity for her." The more Musian looked at it, the more he felt like Naxi. Glancing at Luo Tan, who was making tea at the white jade table in front of the pavilion, Musian gently rubbed his daughter's head and said warmly, "Let's leave after drinking tea." Even if he wanted to leave now, he probably wouldn't be able to. After all, from just now, the gentle and charming wife beside him had been looking at Mururuo and him. "If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have listened to this little cotton-padded jacket. No, if it was black-hearted Mian, I should have just carried her back to the room and locked her up." As Musian, who is well versed in the relationship between men and women and is proficient in tea art, it is not difficult to see from Mururuo's various operations just now that although this little girl is young, her rank is not low. Probably because of being in the fish pond on weekdays. "I just don't know why this kid wanted to send him away alone and not let him come into contact with other fishes." Musian sighed helplessly, but maintained a gentle smile on his face and said, "Your Highness, are you still used to living here? It's okay. It's no different from when we were in Yunzhou before. Anyway, we are all alone." The princess smiled and looked at Musian gently. "When did you have such a big child? Or, is this some kind of game you are playing with this girl?" She still couldn't believe it, thinking that this might not be Musian's child. After all, this girl looks to be 12 or 13 years old. Musian has only been in heaven for a long time. How could he have such a big daughter without making any noise? But if it's not a child? He even asks someone to call him daddy. Has he become so perverted? Musian noticed the princess' eyes full of darkness, and the expression on her face became a little tense. She coughed lightly. "It's a long story, but in short, she is indeed my child, but not know who her biological mother is." "Are you sure you didn't ask a girl from the Leaf clan or a certain tribe from the Mu clan to play some kind of father-daughter game with you?" Although she had been vaguely aware of a certain blood relationship between Musian and Mururuo, she still found it unbelievable. She even suspected that someone was playing tricks on her and blinded her perception. Seeing that the princess still looked disbelieving and looked at him as if she was a pervert, Musian couldn't help but sigh. At this time, Mururuo picked up the pastry on the table and took a small bite. While tasting the delicious food, she held her cheek and glanced at the princess. "He is indeed my father, but I traveled from the future to this time." "Oh? The future. There was a hint of doubt in the princess's usually gentle and beautiful eyes, and she said softly, "From the future to the present, can you do this? Could it be that you are the child of concubine Shang Yan?" In the princess's cognition, only the child of the patriarch can enter the return to void realm within 13 years of birth, and can even travel from the future to the present. Mururuo sat obediently, with her back straight, her feet wrapped in white socks, gently shaking. She shook her head and said, "I can't reveal my mother's identity, otherwise it will involve the secrets of heaven." The princess was stunned for a moment, then looked up and down at this cute and pure girl for several times, and then there was a hint of playfulness in her gentle eyes. "So that's it, is it her child?" she whispered to herself. Musian was still confused, and saw that the princess seemed to have guessed the truth, and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. "Do you know who her mother is?" The princess nodded gently, "Almost guessed it. Since she can reveal who her biological father is, why can't she reveal her biological mother? If it were any of us, it wouldn't matter if we revealed it. After all, with the blessing of the rules of the heavenly court, the heavenly tribulation will not descend on the heavenly court," the princess reminded intentionally or unintentionally. "Unless that person's existence is the heavenly tribulation itself. I think her biological mother should not be in the category of human. Musian was stunned for a long time, looked at Mururuo, and then looked at the princess. Suddenly, he had a vague answer in his heart. Heavenly Deo. Yes, after all, Heavenly Deo is the will of all living things. Revealing her identity will indeed be backfired. But, is it the new Heavenly Deo that is doing it, or is it the old Heavenly Deo that is making trouble in secret? While Musian was still thinking, he suddenly seemed to see a strand of silver hair passing by in his vision. He seemed to hear a pleasant sound like the collision of bells. However, when Musian woke up, the sound had disappeared, and the strand of silver hair that he had just captured in his vision had also disappeared. "Come here." Then, a charming and crisp voice suddenly came from the bottom of his heart. Musian subconsciously raised his head and looked in a certain direction outside the pavilion. Someone is calling him. "Sorry, I've been a bit stuck lately, so the update is a bit slow. By the way, Naxi's illustration is at the end of the finale. You can see it by clicking on the finale chapter and then clicking on refresh this chapter in the upper right corner. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 668. Over there? Musian walked slowly along the vaguely heard voice, and soon walked out of the courtyard. Outside the courtyard, he saw a girl in a white dress. Her long silver hair fell straight down like a waterfall, leaving only a delicate and pretty profile. The long skirt fell just to the knees, revealing a pair of slender and round beautiful legs, and a pair of white low-heeled shoes on her feet, with crystal clear toes. But the most eye-catching thing was not her dress, but the dazzling halo that appeared behind the girl at this time, like the scorching sun. If you look closely, you will find that the halo is completely made of runes, and it looks sacred and flawless. Little Yuanluo is getting hotter and hotter, Musian sighed in his heart. In fact, from Yuanluo's pure appearance, it seems that she has some similarities with Lin Ling. But the former is pure with a kind of burning that makes people want to pick her up and bully her, while Lin Ling is another different style, a little silly and cute, always making people feel pity. As if she noticed Musian's gaze, Yuanluo turned her head slightly and waved her hand with a smile. "You are here. You are imitating Ling more and more like her." Musian sighed sincerely. Yuanluo rolled her eyes charmingly. "What do you mean by imitation? For you, I specially created a new personality to meet you today, and I also wore your favorite short skirt and sandals. Shouldn't you praise me when you first meet me?" She stomped her feet lightly as she spoke, and the white sandals that symbolized holiness made a very pleasant knocking sound. "In addition, I also copied the Taoist magic of the Green Emperor, adding a little sacredness. You men all like to conquer the high and mighty Empress, don't you? Musian subconsciously looked down at her slender legs wrapped in thin translucent stockings, and looked at her skin covered by the holy golden light. He thought that this girl was lucky that she didn't have the mind of palace fighting, otherwise she would be tied with the sect leader's sister and Yao Meng as the three giants. The new Tiandao has the relevant characteristics of all the fish in Musian's fish pond, and can even copy and imitate them. If you want, it's easy to control Musian's XP. She is very beautiful, Musian admired sincerely. Then, Musian's forehead was suddenly covered with black lines. But you gave birth to my daughter, right? Yuan Luo raised her eyelids, blinked her innocent eyes, tilted her head and asked, what do you mean I gave birth to her? Shouldn't we work together to give birth to Mururuo? She played with a strand of silver hair with her fingertips as if nothing had happened, with a hint of teasing in her tone. Are you going to be irresponsible now that you are a father? The problem is that I haven't done anything with you at all, right? Ruruo is not your daughter, is it really you and I who gave birth to her? Musian held his forehead and sighed. Although Musian had thought about taking over the new Tiandao as soon as possible in the past few months, it was almost impossible to capture a Tiandao that had almost no emotions. Not to mention having any relationship with this cute little silver-haired beauty. Musian felt something was wrong no matter how he thought about it. He thought that Mururuo's child should be a child created by Yuan Luo who copied his bloodline. However, just as he was thinking about this, Yuan Luo suddenly stepped forward on tiptoe and kissed him gently on the lips. Who told you that we haven't done anything between us now, and we won't do anything in the future? Yuan Luo took 2 steps back and showed a charming smile. Didn't I tell you before? When I purify the unclean evil spirit of the old Tiandao, you can do whatever you want at that time, woo woo woo. Musian suddenly didn't follow the moral code of martial arts, and tightly embraced the silver-haired beauty's waist into his arms, lowered his head and kissed her soft cherry lips. This woman gave him so many things for no reason. If he didn't give her a little education, wouldn't she play even crazier in the future? This time he sent his future daughter here, what about next time? What about the next time? Yuan Luo's face turned slightly red, and she said in a confused voice, wait a minute, aren't you afraid of being seen by your daughter? As soon as she said this, she realized that Musian's lips had already approached her crystal earlobe. Yuan Luo's body trembled subconsciously, and her body seemed to gradually soften. At this time, a series of extremely complex data suddenly appeared in Yuan Luo's bright and moving red eyes. After nearly 3 seconds, her eyes gradually went from blurry to clear, and she immediately pushed Musian away gently. Yuan Luo's hair was a little messy, and there was still a blush on her little face. She was panting softly in her mouth. She rolled her eyes at Musian. I almost forgot that I also referred to the characteristics of the Demon King. Her earlobes are sensitive. Are you willing to tell me how Mururuo came to be? Musian stared at Yuan Luo dimly and said, if you don't tell me, I must teach you a memorable lesson before I enter the small dark room. Yuan Luo wanted to say a few more words, but after weighing the pros and cons, she finally sighed helplessly, okay, I'll tell you. She is Bairuoxi's child, but it wasn't me. It was born after, old, Tiandao simulated Bairuoxi. Old Tiandao. Musian was stunned by the unexpected answer. He didn't expect that the old Tiandao could still do so many things even though he was so weak now. And she actually had a child with the old Tiandao who became Bairuoxi without knowing it in the future? Do you think it was really me? Yuan Luo glanced at the boy with a trace of contempt in her eyes. I won't use such a despicable means, only she can do it. The old and new Tiandao are now in a hostile relationship where everyone looks down on each other. The old Tiandao believes that if it weren't for Musian, it would be a piece of cake for her to suppress Yuan Luo. But in Yuan Luo's opinion, Musian was able to take down the old Tiandao, and she should take at least 1/3 of the credit. In short, the two have very bad compatibility, and they are the type that will fight when they meet. So you came to me just to tell me this, Musian said to himself. Yes, but someone took my kindness for granted and wanted to bully me, Yuan Luo said contemptuously. At the end of the story, her pretty face couldn't help but blush slightly, and she subconsciously rubbed her beautiful legs under her skirt. She glanced at Musian inconspicuously, and saw that he was still in thought, so she was slightly relieved. The spiritual energy of the natural furnace can affect her, not to mention that Yuan Luo is not deliberately maintaining the ruthless principle of the way of heaven. Musian's natural furnace has given her humanity. And the spiritual energy on Musian will naturally affect her all the time. It's just that she doesn't want Musian to find out about this, it will make her feel too embarrassed. Sorry, then do you have any way to send Ruruo back to the future? Musian suddenly asked. Yuan Luo asked back, do you want to send her back? Musian was silent. To be honest, he felt that it didn't really have any impact. At least he could spend some time with his daughter and then consider sending her back. After thinking for a long time, Musian made up his mind. In that case, let her stay in heaven for a while. After all, although this child has some art skills, she is still her father's little cotton-padded jacket, and Musian still likes her very much. Although this little cotton-padded jacket is black-hearted. Yang has been sick for a few days, and is still coughing now, because the new crown reaction is a bit slow, and I scalded my hand when pouring hot water yesterday. I really cried to death. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 669. After saying goodbye to Yuan Luo, Musian returned to the courtyard, only to see his daughter, who had been a little noisy just now, curled up on Luo Tan's thighs and seemed to have fallen asleep. Your daughter is much more well-behaved than I thought. I thought she would be difficult to coax at first, but it seems that she is almost tired after making a fuss all day. Luo Tan looked up and smiled at Musian. There was a bit of teasing in her tone. Although she was not in the heavenly palace just now, Luo Tan was the empress of Yuzhou. What kind of descendants had she not seen? Although Mururuo pretended to be a well-behaved girl who was a caring little cotton-padded jacket of her father, Luo Tan could still see that the little cotton-padded jacket was actually black when it was turned over. Would you like a cup of tea? She handed the teacup prepared on the table to Musian. Thank you. After taking a sip of the teacup and feeling the fragrance of the tea filling his mouth, Musian couldn't help but exclaim, sure enough, the tea you brew is more fragrant, and the fragrance of the tea is overflowing. The herbs cultivated in the heavenly palace are much richer than those in Zhuzhou. The spiritual energy here is too abundant, although it is still not as rich as the spiritual energy of the natural furnace. Luo Tan gently stroked Mururuo's sleeping face. She sat upright, with a slender and sexy waist under her upright chest, and a pair of round and slender legs under her gorgeous white skirt. She was wearing exquisite snow-white boots, and the uppers were embroidered with cloud patterns of gold and silver threads, which were luxurious and gorgeous. The long hair that fell naturally, the golden phoenix hairpin inserted in the carefully combed bun, and the pendant on the jade neck embellished with a special black gem, which was sandwiched between the plump chest, highlighting the luxurious and gorgeous temperament of the empress. Ordinary women would only look vulgar if they wore such luxurious clothes, but Luo Tan was able to control such makeup and dress well. Luo Tan, who was wearing simple and elegant makeup, was beautiful, but she lacked the temperament she should have. Such luxurious dresses and robes made her one of the few stunning beauties in Zhuzhou. Although this child is not very old, she has a lot of thoughts. The princess sat beside Luo Tan, with soft eyebrows and eyes, looking at Mururuo with pity. Compared with the luxurious and gorgeous Yao Huang, the princess next to her had a different style. She wore a simple cloth skirt that was quite homely, but it was hard to hide her natural beauty. Her delicate face was slightly pale, revealing a little weakness. Her gentle temperament also added a bit of mature charm that only beautiful wives have. She looked pitiful and could easily arouse men's desire to protect her. Luo Tan's gorgeous dress could not overwhelm the beauty of the Princess of Yunzhou, but perfectly set off the princess's elegance and gentleness, which made people's eyes light up. These two people are simply two different extremes, one is noble and elegant, and the clothes are even more luxurious, while the other is gentle and moving, and the clothes are simple but can't hide her natural beauty. Muzian couldn't help but glance at the two of them a few more times. Speaking of which, after coming to the heavenly palace, Luo Tan seems to have been living here, and he hasn't been intimate with me, Muzian suddenly thought. Muzian came here several times before, but every time he happened to catch Luo Tan in seclusion studying immortal medicine, so he had to give up. What's wrong? Noticing the boy's gaze, Luo Tan took a sip of the teacup and asked with a smile. After such a long time, he finally thought of coming to see her? At this moment, I have to whet his appetite a little bit. Muzian saw Luo Tan's teasing look and said calmly, "It's okay, I just suddenly thought that we haven't seen each other for a while." Looking at Luo Tan's reaction, it can be known that the Medicine King probably wants to wait for him to speak first so that he can take the initiative. Now all we have to do is to continue to play with Luo Tan. Luo Tan glanced at Muzian casually and chuckled, "After all, you are busy every day, and there are many people in the heavenly court who are watching you, it's normal that you don't have time to come to me." Seemingly casual words, but in fact they are silent accusations and contempt. Muzian looked down at Mururuo, who fell asleep on Luo Tan's legs, and was silent for a while. "Sorry," he suddenly said softly, this time with a sincere apology in his tone. Luo Tan was slightly startled and looked at the boy in front of him suspiciously. Muzian sighed softly, "I thought that after coming to the heaven, you were obsessed with studying immortal medicine and cultivating natural treasures, so you naturally forgot about me. But it seems that I might be wrong." Muzian looked up at Luo Tan and said softly, "I should have come to see you earlier, I'm sorry." Luo Tan's eyes rippled slightly, and with her noble and beautiful face, she exuded an elegant temperament. The displeasure she had originally felt towards Muzian in her heart seemed to have dissipated a little in the boy's apology, and her eyebrows were less cold and more gentle. Indeed, since ascending to the heaven, she has been studying immortal medicine and cultivating natural treasures every day. Of course, she didn't really forget Muzian, she just wanted to whet his appetite a little. But she never thought, the fight in this fish pond was very dangerous, especially the woman Kingdi, who almost hooked Muzian's soul away. Playing idle erotic games obviously won't work. The appearance of Mururuo today sounded the alarm for Luo Tan. If this continues, today it was Mururuo, but who knows if someone else's daughter will appear next time. Muzian couldn't help but smile slightly when he saw Luo Tan's expression softening. Sure enough, the Medicine King was angry at first, because Mururuo's appearance gave her a sense of crisis. But now, after apologizing, it seems that there is no problem. That's a rich experience. However, at this time, the princess, who was quietly watching the scene, suddenly said, "Tanner didn't see her because she was busy, but I have been living with Tanner, and Mr. Mu didn't seem to come to see me." Her voice was gentle and sweet, and she looked at Muzian with a gentle smile. "Mr. Mu, is it because he doesn't want to disturb Tanner when he sees him studying the elixir, or is he so addicted to the bodies of Qing Emperor and others that he can't help himself?" The Princess of Yunzhou fully demonstrated what a gentle sword is and how deadly it is. Muse Hainan said that the princess had installed a surveillance camera on me. Why did she even know that I was partying on weekdays? As Ruruo said just now, she is really a good child, haha. The princess seemed to know what Muzian was thinking, and smiled softly. Muzian. He looked silently at the sleeping little girl lying on Luo Tan's snow-white legs, and was silent for a moment. As expected, This child followed his mother and was almost exactly the same as Ruoxi. On the surface, he looked like an innocent and cute little white rabbit, but in fact, he was black when cut open. On the other side, after hearing this, Luo Tan couldn't help but raise her eyebrows slightly and looked at Musian again. Are you obsessed with the Qing Emperor? The elegant and noble Empress' eyes were quite meaningful, and she gave Musian a deep look. But she didn't get angry, she just smiled and said, if Ruruo is still asleep now, it's not convenient to take her back. Why don't we let her sleep here today? You might as well stay. At the end of the sentence, Luo Tan sat with her legs crossed, swaying her snow-white boots slightly, holding her chin in one hand and looking at him with a smile in her eyes. A green seed appeared in her hand. For some reason, Musian had a bad feeling. What is this? He asked subconsciously. This is what I developed during this period by imitating Kingdi's purifying seed. Although the effect is not as good as the purifying seed, it is very convenient to use to restrict the actions of others. Luo Tan stood up, raised his hand and gently placed it on Musian's chest. The seeds in her hand suddenly grew countless vines, quietly twining in the direction of Musian. Musian's smile faltered and he said warmly, Luo Tan. Luo Tan snorted softly and said quietly, I originally wanted to cultivate flowers and plants with peace of mind, but when we saw the child Ruruo today, both the princess and I thought it was quite cute. I suddenly thought just now, it seems that in addition to cultivating flowers and plants, cultivating children is also quite good. So. She leaned close to the young man's ear and exhaled like a blue breath, let's have a baby too, Mu Lang. Musian. I'm super, I'm done with it.